claim is, I'm dying for the sake of something, and so their blood becomes a promise, it becomes a shahid. And the blood reflects how they lived. That's what's also more beautiful. It's not the case that someone lives any lifestyle and then they die, they become shaheed. No, they live the life of a shuhada before they're killed. And then when they are killed, their blood points back to, look at how I lived. Allahumma ij'al mahya. Allah, give me the life of Muhammad wa mamati wa Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Give me both, their life and their death. Why? Because the death of Ali Muhammad points back to exactly how they lived. As beautiful as you'll find the Shahadat of Abu Abdullah, his life is as equally as beautiful. Because all of Karbala is pointing back towards Allah, but it's pointing through the life of Abu Abdullah. The purpose of that pointing is painful. Ashura is very difficult, but a statement is being made that look at where I am pointing. That's why he's not just Shaheed, he's Sayyid al-Shuhada. It's a whole different level. There are many Shuhada, only one is Sayyid among them, the master of the Shuhada. Why? Because a Shaheed is someone whose blood points back towards Allah. I mentioned this. Abu Abdullah is Thar Allah, the blood of Allah. His whole being becomes the blood of God. Meaning what? He is pointing towards the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When the 4,000 angels come to help Abu Abdullah on Ashura and he refuses them, he says to them, no, don't fight for me, for I am with my affairs with Allah. What's their slogan? Ya latharat al-Hussain. Oh, the blood of Hussain that was not yet been spilt. Abu Abdullah has not just become a man who dies on a path. He has become the very blood which Islam has life because of. One of our scholars says, you know the famous narration of Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where the Prophet says this ummah is like one body. I know the Shabab know this hadith because I mentioned them in the afternoon majlis that we do. The ummah is like one body. When one part feels in pain, the whole body is hurt from that one pain. Yeah. If one person is suffering in our community, we are all suffering with them. One of our alims says, do you know what Hussain Thar Allah means? It means if there is one body of Islam, what's the blood that's pumping through that body if not the blood of Abu Abdullah? That since Ashura, this body remains alive from that blood. Where is that blood except from this Sayyid al-Shuhada? That's how great a Shaheed is. That's how great Sayyid al-Shuhada is. Now see how everything we have today in terms of true Islam, Haqqan Islam, is from Sayyid al-Shuhada. You could argue in our history, this ummah has been through two, you say more, but I'm going to say two extremely critical points in our history. If we didn't survive those two periods of history with our true religion, we would have lost our entire faith. The first is the time of Banu Abbas, right after Banu Umayyah. And the second is only 400 to 500 years before now. Let me go through them. As for the first, after Banu Umayyah committed the act of Ashura and many other evil acts after, as you know, Banu Abbas learned a lesson. You can't go to war with an Imam without their death becoming a symbol for the people of resistance. It can't happen. And so we don't see after Abu Abdullah any of Banu Abbas who come after trying to go to war with an Imam in the same way of Abu Abdullah. Instead, that attitude changes. What's the attitude? We must somehow corrupt the Imam so that Imamate itself is weakened. Or if we can't do that, at least poison them so they don't become an example. Little did they know, every single poisoned Imam is for us a hero, and for our children a hero as well. So that failed. But what they did then is what? In the life of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, they found that if we can't corrupt him, let's introduce new ideas into the qawm. So Mansur al-Dawarniqi, who was the Khalifa at that time, funded for the translation of many books from other languages into Arabic. For example, Greek literature into Arabic, so that there were new ideas. And he called ulama, scholars, philosophers from other countries to come and debate Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. But as all of you could imagine, every time they brought a new idea, a new book, or a new scholar to the Imam alayhi salam, his words were enough to defeat all of their arguments. Not just his words, Hisham bin Hakam can defeat them. You don't even need Imam Sadiq to answer against these people. But they realized what? We have to change it. So what do? Then they flipped the script. They took the words of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, put it in books and put another person's name on those books. So they took all the fadail of the Imam, of how he answered those who were wrong, and gave it to other people. So the future generations won't know who it was who saved them in those debates with those ideas. One step further, there are many Isra'iliyat in our narrations. Isra'iliyat are those ideas coming from Christian or Jewish thought, which don't belong in Tawheed of Rasulullah. But for example, people like Ka'b and others would argue they came from the Holy Prophet. So in our books there are these weird narrations which are completely majhul, which have no rationality, but they're in the books to try and misguide people about God. Do you remember the lecture I went through those who said Allah has a physical face and a physical throne and a physical hand? These are Israeliyat. They did this tactic. Then you have completely fake narrations, Abu Huraira type narrations, where these things come from nowhere except the imagination of a man. And here they are in our books being called fiqh and sahih. These tactics were done in order to do what? If the books themselves don't contain the truth, those who read and study in the future generations won't know the truth, and we corrupt the religion. The thing which saved us from that tactic was Azadari of Abu Abdullah. I can say confidently, going to our books and the ideas of our ulama, the only reason why we survived all those threats to our belief was because of Azadari. How? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Come a little bit closer, inshallah, please. Come closer, those of you who can. Sallu ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. First of all, what we learned on Ashura was that Azadari comes against the state, not from the state. Because Imam Hussain alayhi salam, what have we learned? He's prepared to lay down his entire family to go against the government of his time for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which means, number one, whoever is in charge in government does not affect Azadari. So there was an independence from Banu Abbas onwards in that time, that whatever the shu'ara say about Abu Abdullah, the poets, those who read Musibat, not a single person in the authority can come and censor or correct them. Because what? Abu Abdullah was against the government. How can we let a government tell us what to say about Abu Abdullah? It's a very important idea. We are in control and in ownership of all our kalam about Abu Abdullah. Because any politician want to use all the energy of Abu Abdullah for their own purposes. This wasn't the case back then. Also, we learned from many poets doing Azadari that when they tried to weaken our faith, they brought our faith into the Azadari. How? In the poetry and marsiya, they added our laws and ahkam. It's an amazing move. In public, they're saying against khums, against zakat. Shaykh Sibta Jafar has poems, kalams, where he's doing dhikr of khums while doing Sharif Ali ibn Abi Talib. They speak against our resistance and our beliefs. Our poets in time of Banu Abbas would add into their poetry the laws of namaz and roza and these things, to show the people, if you want to know true fiqh and law, you must go through Ahlul Bayt. It was in the poetry. Also, in addition to this point, they kept Ahlul Bayt central to modern life, because at least once a year you have to read Musib of Abu Abdullah. At least once a year. What that meant was, all of those khulafa who tried to take Ahlul Bayt away from the public eye, take Imam Rida, bringing him all the way to Iran. Why? Take him away from the people. Imams, why are they in house arrest? Why is Imam al-Kadhim not seeing the light of day? Because their idea is, if we take the Imam away from the people, they'll forget the need for the Imam. But here we have something once a year they can't take away. Annual Azza of Abu Abdullah. And the one crying in Majlis will then say, who's the Imam of today? And they'll see your Imam of today is As-Sadiq or Al-Baqir or Rida. And then you turn towards the Imam of your time. So it preserves your thinking. More than this, we save the idea of the ghaybat through Azadari. Banu Abbas wanted, what was their tactic? Make sure that people think the Imam of the time is Banu Abbas, that's their whole claim to authority. So what did our poets do? Go to Sharif Murtada and all of our poets and Diqbil. They started doing fadail of the dhuhur in our sha'iri from Imam Hussain alayhi salam. They would say, the blood that has been spilled for Karbala, who will come and avenge that blood? And they'd cry over both lines. That's why today, if there are salams or marsiyas or nohas, which include Imam Zamana, it's so important, because he's directly linked to Azhar. So as you can see, our scholars decided and made the ability that we will not let any of their threats succeed, and our tool to answer them is Abu Abdullah, his Azhar. And through the sha'iri and the musibat and the roza and the na'i and the matam, they were able to correct all of these wrong ideas. This issue happened again when colonial time. For, you could say, 2 to 3 centuries, the majority of the countries of which all of you are from were run by Britain or France. India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and those, I don't know if there's any Iraqis here or Iraqis, parts of Africa, Iran, all of them were run by Britain and France. And what you had then was a period of time where they were in control of our ilm. I think I mentioned this on night 1. So what's the problem? We've grown up with knowledge of Quran, Ahlul Bayt. We teach it to ourselves, we're independent. Here comes some invader from a different country, controlling not just one generation, multiple generations, changing our curriculum, changing our access to our libraries, bringing their own scholars and paying people to come to India and Iraq and Afghanistan to speak in favor of empire in the language of Islam. So if you go to the books for 300-400 years, maybe less, 200 to 300 years, you have praise of the British Empire from Muslim scholars. Why? Because they're being paid by the invaders to use Islam to support their political view. Okay, this becomes even more hard. We have a word called turath. Turath means your inheritance. You know how we have wirasat in Urdu or arath in Arabic? What you inherit. What we inherited after the colonial time was not the same Islam as what we had before. Before colonial time, we have from Sheikh al-Tusi until the alim of the time a continuous line of scholars. In that time, there are no hawzas or madaris, and if they are so small. So how can we preach true Islam if there's a break of 200 years in that time? Okay. In that time, many incorrect ideas became part of Islamic law. For example, the idea that when you have an unjust ruler of your time, you can't uprise against him. This is in Sunni books more than Shia books, but it's there. In the same way when they said to Yazid, be accountable for Ashra, what does he say? I didn't do it, Allah did this. Blame Allah for this action. This is a weak argument, but he said this. Same thing now. How can you blame us for what's been happening for the difficult times? We can't uprise against the leader of our time. It's haram. And they'll have narrations and fatawa and hukam saying it's haram for a Muslim to uprise against a dhalim. Okay. Then there's the idea as well that if you want true value, you have to go to the West. Ask yourselves, why are we even in this country? Because either us or our parents or their parents decided we want a good life. Yeah, but why did they think a good life has to mean the UK, Britain, France, America? Why? There was money in other places too, and there's still money in other places. Because the idea was embedded. The West is advanced, the East is uncivilized. And Muslims decided to turn back and leave their countries and go to other countries. I'm going to come to how we solve this problem. More than this, secularism, Sunni Shia violence came from that time. It existed before, but it became more widespread at that time. How? When the British came to India, they first introduced the census. And the census was not used back then where you ask someone like we have now, where do you live, what's your age, where are you from? Then they also asked, are you Sunni or Shia? They asked that question. And they kept records, which are available today, of all those who were Shia in different towns. And then they had their tactic. What's the tactic? Divide and conquer, to split apart those communities. One ambassador to Britain writes, I've been to India, parts of I think North India or maybe Northeast, which could be part of Pakistan as well at that time. I found the Muslims, the Mohammedans they called us, are an uncivilized group and bunch. But there are ways to break them apart. For example, it's written that there is a group called the Shiites, and their strategy is to whip themselves for a master called the Saint of Hussain. If we split them from the rest of them, we can weaken the Muslims. They wrote this then. Okay. Now we answer, how did we survive that time with Abu Abdullah helping us? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. First of all, our scholars decided if they'll take away our universities from us, we will make the Mimbar the university of Ahlul Bayt. Mimbar in the beginning was just for one thing, shura, yani mourning for Abu Abdullah. It became for the message at this time in the last 300 to 400 years. It's very new that you even come to a majlis like this. 600 years ago, go to your hometown. Was there really a Maulana giving a dars before Masaib? No, there was Marsiya, Salam Marsiya, Masaib, Noha, and other things as well. There was no lecture. That came from the last 200 to 300 years, when we found out if they won't give our ilm to us from them, we'll give it to us ourselves. We'll make the Majlis of Hussain a university, and all of the falsafa and the ahkam and the aqaid and the aqidah and all of the beliefs and the principles of Ahlul Bayt, we'll bring them back to the people through Majlis al-Hussain alayhi salam. What does Imam Khomeini say? Imam Khomeini says, they called us a nation of tears, and with these tears we defeated an empire of 1,000 years. They called us, we just mourn, but we realize it's not just crying for no reason. These tears have strength in them, and in the colonial time we realize there is strength. So we go through a period then called ihya and tajdeed, which means revival and renewal. In that period, scholars like Allama Iqbal came after, and after Mutahhari and Beheshti and others, who realized, no, we will not allow any colonial power, any imperial power to come to us and tell us what Islam is. We'll teach the world what Islam is. And they started writing again with fresh eyes, with ijtihad, helping them teach the world about Ahlul Bayt. So new books came out and new ideas came out from us, where we reclaimed our ilm. And the Hawza was spread up again from Qum and revived again in Najaf. So we used it against them. I'll give you one more point. Marja'iyat came from this period. Before 200 years ago, there wasn't some mujtahid you go and follow. Didn't exist. You had ijtihad, you had taqleed to some degree. But it's not the case that the ummah had like one scholar, like we might have now, or one or two scholars, and everyone follows them. It wasn't the case. It wasn't the case. There was no mujtahid al-a'lam in that time. These ideas came in the last 200 to 300 years, when you had individual scholars, Allama Murtaza Ansari, Ayatollah Na'ini, and these scholars of that time, who realized that the whole ummah needs guidance from one place, or there'll be misguidance. So one scholar will produce a book called a Risala Amaliya, and that book will have in it all of the laws one person needs for their life. And they'll go to that scholar, and we'll have unity of the community through the taqleed they follow. This came recently. Now look how powerful we became because of this same taqleed. Look at how strong we become because of taqleed and ijtihad. We have defeated empires through this. Even before Iran, we defeated empires through this. Give you an example. In the same time where the colonialists were attacking us, we defeated them with one fatwa. One fatwa. 1891. The Imperial Tobacco Company go to Iran. They have a deal with the Shah, they're from Britain, that we will buy and sell all of the tobacco in Iran. We will do it, and we'll take the majority profit. Now at that time, the whole Muslim world was chewing tobacco at that time, consuming tobacco, including the Muslims in Iran. Okay, slowly the Muslims become weaker and weaker because they're losing their money, the inflation's going up, they can't afford the tobacco, they can't afford to eat or to sleep, and they are suffering now. And the imperial powers are making money off us. By the way, Iran then was Persia. Persia included India and Pakistan then. All of us were suffering at that time. One scholar gives a fatwa. Ayatollah Mirza Shirazi at that time gives one fatwa, 1891. I declare today for all Muslims, he writes, it is haram to consume tobacco, for it's produced by the enemies of Islam, and Imam Zamana would not want you to smoke tobacco in this time. Every single Muslim Shia follows him in that time. Hatta in the house of the Shah, his own servants stopped chewing tobacco because of this fatwa. In the house of the Shah. The next year, the British Tobacco Company failed. You know that company at that time? It was worth 500,000 of that time. That's 77 million of today's money. Defeated from one fatwa in 1 year. Because all the Muslims said marja'iyat is more powerful than any other thing. And they followed this. A few years later, there was a revolution in Iran of a constitution. And within that generation, there's a whole revolution of that country. One fatwa destroyed the colonialists in that time. This all happened when? Through Abu Abdullah. What did I say a couple of days ago? Remember that scholar who before praying said Assalamu alaikum ya Abu Abdullah when praying? And they said to him, who are you to say Assalamu alaikum ya Abu Abdullah in namaz? We're praying namaz. And he says, don't you realize all this namaz, this hajj, this masjid, this whole marja'iyat only survives because of Abu Abdullah? Only because of him on Ashura. Survives because of him. Because of these two things, Azadari in the early age and Azadari recently, we have survived with dignity and izzah as a qawm today. And what do we have to show for it? What's our inheritance? What's our turath? Shahadat. Shahadat is what we have inherited. And Shahadat is like a spine from Abu Abdullah until now. One vein linking him to us directly. Every generation since Abu Abdullah till now has had people who have been shaheed for him. Even now. And every time that happens, we remember there is one link from us to the true religion of Islam, and it's through Abu Abdullah. I want to give you a point that's very dear to my heart. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. A Muslim should be reading on Friday Dua Nudba. Yeah, Dua Nudba. In Dua, we speak about one of the most difficult times for Ahlul Bayt, which was just after the death of Imam Ali alayhi salam, okay? Right at that time. We read in Dua Nudba that mujtami'utun ala qati'atu rahimi. Everyone came together to cut relations from you, Ya Ali. Khawarij, Ashab, people who followed, the woman, all of them came together. To do what? To fight Imam Ali alayhi salam. Mujtami'atun, all together, qati'atu rahimi. Illa al-qalil. Except a few people, a minority of people, مِمَّنْ وَفَاءَ لِرِعَايَةِ الْحَقِّ فِيهِمْ, who had wafa in them, loyalty in them for the haqq of Ahlul Bayt. When everyone fought against you, Ya Ali, only a tiny minority stayed with you, qalil. However, because there were so few, فَقُتِلَ مَنْ قُتِلَ, some of them were killed because of this love for you, Ali. وَالصُّبِيَ مَنْ صُبِي, and some were imprisoned for your love, Ali. وَأُقْسِي مَنْ أُقْسِي, and some were banished from their lands for loving you, Ya Ali. In the most difficult and tense time that we had, when it was like Wilayah was hanging on a small thread, the few who actually held onto it received suffering for some were killed. قُتِلَ مَنْ قُتِلَ, go to Ashura. Why is Ashura happening if not for the love of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam on that day? There's a narration, it's not that strong, but because I've heard second ulama who are strong narrate it, I'll mention it. Imam Hussain alayhi salam, day of Ashura, while he's being killed, while he's being shaheed. If I mention the actual narration, you'll start crying now. It's part of the most pure masayib of Abu Abdullah, his last moments. They say he has a particular wound in his body, and while the blood flows on his body, he says, I will go to Rasulullah, covered in this blood, say, Ya Rasulullah, on this day Hussain was killed by Fulan and Fulan. On this day, they killed me. The moment they attacked my father at Saqifa, this Ashura happened. They're the ones who killed me on that day. And look at since him, how many people died for the sake of this religion since Abu Abdullah. How many more do we have to have? How many shaheeds we have to know that our inheritance is shahadat? We have to embrace shahadat. Hajjaj killed so many Muslims after this time. They kept on killing us until now. Sheikh Nimr, Sheikh Hassan Shahata, our scholars right now, how many more have to die until we know? Shahadat is our wirasat, our turath, our inheritance. Go to targets killing in Pakistan, go to Afghanistan, go to Iraq today, go to the Spiker massacre, where they lined up the boys from the cadets and said, which of you are Shia? If you're Shia, come close. And in one day they killed thousands of boys because they were Shia. And this is like 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And in Camp Spiker, what did they say? The river had become red from the blood of the Shias who were in the army of Iraq. This is what we have inherited, and we'll never let go of it. Never, because all of this Islam survives through the blood that we shed today for Abu Abdullah. One of my friends goes to Pakistan and works with Shuhada a lot. He went to Punjab and areas of also to Peshawar and Parachinar to sit with the families of the Shuhada, to speak to them. He tells me a story. He goes, once I went and I sat with a mother whose son had died and had been shahed for a target killing. He says to me directly, he told me. And do you know what happened? They targeted his son, killed his son, but before they killed him, they would torture him, and they would call his mother on the phone while torturing her son. He told me, the mother says, while they were pulling the nails from his body, they called me and said, this is what your love has done for you. So my friend said to her, that why did they target your son of all of the other sons who were there? She said, because of his name. His name was a name of the Ahlul Bayt. That's why. So my friend said to him, all around here are your other sons. There were sons there. He says, have you considered changing the name of any of your sons so this doesn't happen again? He says the mother was quiet for the whole time. But the moment he said this, she got angry and turned to all her sons and says, don't you dare think of this in your life, that you would let go of the name of Ahlul Bayt to survive one more day. Our inheritance is shahadat. Don't you, she got angry, don't you dare for a moment even think of what he's just said, that you would change the name of Ali or Hassan or Hussain to live an easy life when my son has died like this. No, we will embrace death like this. In our own lifetime, we have a whole generation of shuhada who, when the call was made that ISIS are approaching Sayyidah Zainab and there is no one left to defend them, among our community there was a few brave men who stood and said, no, we won't allow it to happen. And they booked flights and they took buses and they walked day and night to reach the haram, and now they are buried around her haram. What greater